Greetings, dear viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in Cork, and I'm in front of the Tomas MacCurtain Memorial. And so you can see, obviously put up by the Lord Mayor of Cork at the time, got the Cork's coat of arms and so forth. So Tomas MacCurtain, he was born in the countryside north of Cork in 1884, and he moved as a teenager to live with his elder sister, who was the youngest of 12 children of a family of no great means. He went to the North Mon, a nearby school, probably that's North Monastery. Anyway, so he left school in his mid-teens and went into full-time work. He joined the Gaelic League as in an organisation to promote the usage of the Irish language. He came from an Anglophone language. Anyway, so he worked in various trades, and he didn't pursue tertiary education. Almost nobody did back in those days. The Irish Volunteers were founded, and he joined that. And he knew Terence McSweeney very well, so he didn't participate in any fighting in 1916. It was almost a total damp squib here in Cork, the Easter Rising, and he joined Sinn Féin, because it's not till 1917 that Sinn Féin became considered the political party of the Irish Volunteers. The Irish Volunteers didn't have one. Pádraig Pearse had the deepest disdain for the Home Rule Party, felt that they had lost their youthful radicalism, were more or less seduced by the London establishment, were just feeble, callow and all the rest of it, and supporting Ireland's participation in the First World War. Anyhow, so then Joseph Mary Plunkett had been executed, and his father, Count Plunkett, a papal count, he'd stood for an election and a by-election, actually under the label Liberty League. In those days, you actually didn't have any ballot paper description. Your name was there. It didn't say a political party on the ballot paper. He stood for the Liberty League, not Sinn Féin, actually. He subsequently joined it. Sinn Féin was a minuscule political party founded by Arthur Griffith sometime before. Sinn Féin had contested one by-election ever before the First World War and performed dismally. But Arthur Griffith, remember it being a dual monarchist party, not a Republican party, stood aside in favour of Eamon de Valera to become president of the Sinn Féin party. De Valera, of course, the only surviving commander of any of the Irish Volunteers posts from the 1916 Rising. De Valera, he was spared for various reasons, partly because he was an American citizen. So was Tom Clark, didn't work for him. Some time had elapsed and blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, so then the conflict broke out anew here in Cork in 1919. And Tomas MacCurtain had got himself elected an alderman, we'd now say a city councillor. So on Cork Corporation, that's the city council. And later he was elected Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor is not directly elected. The aldermen, and they almost all were men in those days, got together and would elect one of their number as Lord Mayor. Now, despite being a Republican, because in 1917 Sinn Féin said, to hell with the monarchy, we want a republic, he didn't drop the Lord prefix, which of course was bestowed upon the Mayor of Cork by Queen Victoria, and it was obviously redolent of monarchy, a title such as Lord. We still retain it to this day. So the conflict was in full swing, and the auxiliaries were here as the auxiliaries of the Royal Irish Constabulary, because quite a few police officers had been killed, been invalided out, had retired. Very people were coming forward to replace them. Some had resigned for various reasons. Partly they were frightened that they were going to get killed by the IRA, or indeed they were unhappy about their counterinsurgents' role. They were increasingly ostracised. Remember, the RIC was almost entirely Irish until 1920, and was very heavily Catholic. The RIC was more Catholic than the general population. If the general population was about 75% Catholic, the RIC was over 80% Catholic. So anyhow, the auxiliaries came over. They were former soldiers and sailors from Great Britain, and occasionally from as far afield as Canada, to help out the RIC. And the auxiliaries only pursued a counterinsurgency role. They weren't performing ordinary police duties such as chasing up police, or the theft of sheep or whatever, or traffic offences. There was also the RIC Special Reserve, and the RIC Special Reserve was likewise to try and fill the gaps in the RIC, but they were integrated with ordinary RIC units, whereas the auxiliary were independent units, large ones. Anyhow, so in March the 15th, 1920, there had been a heated argument in some Irish volunteer meeting, and that night some men broke into MacCurtain's house, which is in the Blackpool area of Cork. We are in Blackpool. Notice how we accentuated in Cork, putting the emphasis on the second syllable, not the first. Anyhow, these men had blackened faces with shoe polish or something like that, supposedly spoke in English accents, and they knew where MacCurtain's bedroom was, and he was shot dead. That was that. And his wife and children were there, and a few other relatives. He didn't die instantly. He succumbed to his injuries a short while later. So it was a sitting Lord Mayor who was shot dead, and a huge funeral was held for him. Now, an inquiry was impanelled, a coroner's court, I suppose, and they said Lord George, Prime Minister of England, is guilty of wilful murder. Well, it was a completely moronic thing to say, since there is no Prime Minister of England and never has been, nor indeed was Lord George English. He's Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and it was obviously ultra vires. They're not. One of these inquiries is not entitled to convict anyone of murder. It's not a court of law. It's not a trial. What else? And they asked the RIC what had been happening, and the RIC was very, very cooperative. Remember, there's a curfew at the time. You couldn't go out of your house after a certain time, and the police and army were patrolling, saying, "Stop, where are you going, who are you?" and searching people's houses quite a lot. So the idea was that only the RIC could have been on the streets. Obviously, the IRA did slip out sometimes to commit attacks, or indeed they were in the countryside and came in to do this kind of thing. Now, the RIC said it must have been another faction, the IRA did it, which some people have just dismissed out of hand, but it's not implausible. As I say, there had been a blazing row in some IRA council that day, having some sort of dispute about strategy or seniority. I'm not quite sure what. Anyway, it might have been the RIC who killed him, I don't know. And the RIC said, we have this many officers on duty at this station and accounting for their movements, so they were very cooperative with the Court of Inquiry. If there's something to hide, you think they wouldn't do so. So why would this coroner's court find the RIC guilty of killing him? Well, partly it's propaganda. Many of them would have been Republicans, and say, let's advance the Republican cause, let's besmirch the reputation of the Crown Forces. Already they're frightened to do so. It wasn't worth your life to speak out against the IRA at this time. It was a terrifying time to be in Cork, because the IRA killed well over 100 civilians, calling them informers, often dumping them in Top Tory Lane near Ballyfahan and in the countryside. Other people were intimidated out, said you've got 24 hours to leave, either be killed, or their cattle were stolen, their houses were burnt, things like that. The Crown Forces going around arresting people they suspected of being in the IRA, we in turn sent to Ballinkenlar. Occasionally these people were beaten up, things like that. So was it the RIC who killed him? Could have been, because he's a senior figure in the IRA. Say, well, there's a conflict on and that's that. And you're fighting outside the Geneva Convention, so we're going to do the same. No Marquis of Queensberry rules, the gloves are off. Your side shows they're not the least compunction about killing people unarmed, so we're going to do the same. And your side has no hesitation in killing people in the presence of their relatives, so we shall do likewise. So I don't actually know who killed him. Anyway, he's buried in St Finbar Cemetery, right at the front, a very prominent place. Terence McSweeney was then elected Lord Mayor, and he died on hunger strike a few months later. So these are the two Cork mayors who were killed. He died on his 36th birthday, incidentally. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning when people broke into his house. Now, just because these men had English accents, if indeed that testimony is accurate, doesn't prove that they are English. There are Corkonians like me who have English accents. Or it could have been IRA men deliberately putting on English accents in order to cast the blame on the Crown Forces. So that is him. He's honoured in various statues. His house is quite close to here. People say his house was wrecked by the Crown Forces afterwards. Presumably they were searching for things, weapons, incriminating documents, because they carried out house searches all the time. Obviously they had to launch a murder investigation right after he was killed. So his son was known as Tomas Og MacCurtain, Og meaning young, to distinguish from his father. And he was a senior figure in the IRA. He was an infant at the time his father was killed. And he was high up in the IRA during the Second World War. And they were obviously trying to attack the UK during the Second World War. And that was really aggravating the United Kingdom. And Eamon de Valera, he'd found a Fianna Fáil by this time. He was Taoiseach, as in Prime Minister. And he was very reluctant to allow them to provoke the United Kingdom. And he lest the United Kingdom invade the Irish Free State, or ERA, so as we called ourselves then. So he interned a lot of IRA men, and the Garda Síochána, their special branch, was shadowing the IRA. And one of them got too close to Tomas MacCurtain, who drew a gun on him and shot dead a Garda sergeant on Patrick Street here in Cork. A really moronic thing to do in broad daylight in the presence of dozens of witnesses. So he was arrested and sentenced to death for murder. He was commuted to life imprisonment, partly out of deference to who his father was. Otherwise, he would have been killed without qualms. de Valera authorised the execution of people who were not even guilty of shooting anyone or attempting to shoot anyone. You know, Maurice O'Neill, who was just present when someone was killed, and things like that. So Tomas MacCurtain was released after 7 years, which was extraordinarily ruth. He died in 1994. Even in the 1950s, he was stomping around in a military uniform and demanding that there be conflict against the UK during the border campaign. If you see that famous documentary from about 12 years ago about the border campaign, then he has a cameo in that. Okay, so that's enough about Tomas MacCurtain.